Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of After Wine School. I'm the resident wine nerd. My name is Keith Wallace, and I'm here with my absolutely favorite fermentation freak, Alana Zerbe.
Thank you, Keith. I do. I love fermentation.
Absolutely. We're going to pay homage to that. Why do wines smell like they do?
Mm-hmm.
Why does my wine smell like banana? Why does it smell like a semi-arid trucker doing a lap around the high school? Whatever it may be. Why does my wine smell like that? Yeast. Everything yeast today.
So this podcast is really exciting because I know there's a lot here to dive into. But basically, I know that yeast is a single-celled organism.
Absolutely.
Okay. It's a member of the fungi family.
Correct.
Okay. Its main job in making wine is to digest.
Yes.
I typically say convert, but I've learned that it's more appropriate to describe the process as digesting grape sugars.
Absolutely. Yes.
That then changes them into alcohol.
Absolutely.
So that's the main role. And then finally, I have practiced my pronunciation.
Yes, you have.
Our main yeast that we use in winemaking is Saccharomyces cerevisiae.
Well, you said that far better than anybody does. Yeah.
Thank you.
We have a shorthand. It's awful, but we usually call it sac.
Oh, I wish I had known.
Yeah. So, So, like, if you ever hear a winemaker saying that they just pitched the sack, as gross as that sounds, it is actually they're just talking about adding yeast to the wine.
Okay.
And it's 100% true. That is the workhorse. There are thousands of different variations of Saccharomyces. All the flavors we get are contributed to that yeast, the sac yeast. But there is actually more though that are out there. Like there's a lot of non-sac yeast out there. Lots of them. Actually, there's like tens of thousands of them. And they're the supporting cast in fermentation oftentimes. We just actively fight them to make sure they don't exist. But for the most part, they're going to be beneficial in some way. Some bring complexity. Some actually just bring pure chaos, like pure, utter chaos to your fermentation. And then there's others that, that bring a little bit of both, complexity and chaos, which is kind of like me.
Yes.
Yeah, sadly.
And I should say, I do also know one more thing. A lot of these wonderful fruit aromas that I'm a big fan of in wine can be attributed to yeast.
Oh, all of them are. And that's the beautiful thing. These fungi, they're consuming fructose and other compounds. And what ends up primarily is ethyl alcohol. How amazing is that, right? But they also, at the same time, producing these compounds, they're also producing esters as well. They are contributing to actually the best parts of wine. It's the booze, but it's also the fruit flavors. So when you taste pear or peaches or apricot or some weird banana note or any other weird thing that I could think of. Yeah, those are esters, baby. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got our fruit notes. And I have done a little bit of research, and I didn't know this, but your yeast also adds to mouthfeel, texture, finish, but also that a lot of researchers now believe that just the whole concept of terroir can be summed up by yeast.
Oh, yeah. I don't like talking about anything unless there's a research paper, which is kind of fun.
I know, yeah.
And so these have been coming out for the last few years. And in fact, when I started running our advanced terroir program for our advanced sommelier and master sommelier students, the entire class was on that one subject. It is one of the core elements. Yeah, it's all the bacterias and yeast and fungi that are actually on the grapes themselves in the vineyard when you bring them in. And if you ferment them naturally, that's terroir. This is one of those pieces of the puzzle when people talk about terroir. They're not really thinking about bugs, but in the wine, we do.
Could you call it a biodome?
Oh, of course. It is a biodome.
It is a biodome.
Like, a whole winery. Now, the thing is, though, a lot of wineries are not going to allow that terroir to exist, so they have their own yeast they can inoculate. But yeah, absolutely. There's an entire world out there.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've learned a little bit about the role of yeast in wine. Let's talk about wines that are really defined by the use of yeast.
These are two examples of how yeast not just ferment and bring in esters and alcohol, but that actually even another kind of yeast actually starts to form on the top. These are the Jaune region of France, and then also this style happens actually sherry in Spain. These two styles form a yeast veil on top, these living yeasts absorb all the oxygen. 'Cause the yeast also absorb oxygen, by the way. They're pulling in oxygen to create chemical reactions that will break down and recreate compounds in the wine. And so with these two styles, both sherry and Vin Jaune, they're actually taking whatever air is in the barrel and converting it into flavor compounds that are very, very unique. So if you think about like almond and walnut and caramel flavors and all these really crazy, lovely flavors that are unlike in any other wine. So if you ever want to try something really, really cool, like a Vin Jaune is amazing. Completely different flavor profile and a completely different yeast flavor profile.
So that's living yeast.
Yes.
I do know that our dead yeast cells, our spent yeast cells,
Yes.
actually are a huge contributor into one of our favorite wines, which is champagne.
Oh, it is.
And the character that you started to talk about there, the nuttiness.
Yeah.
That's one of the characteristic aromas.
Oh, yeah.
That comes from allowing the wine to rest on top of those yeast cells for an extended period. And so
Absolutely.
That's where we talk about those wonderful bready notes
Yes.
and nutty aromas. The fancy way to refer to those are autolytic aromas.
It is.
And the process of that exposure to those cells is called autolysis. So 2 words to know, in addition to sac, that make you sound really professional.
Yeah. Don't say I love the sac in this wine. Don't say that. That's not cool. No. Yeah.
So Keith, let's talk about the role of temperature, because I find this fascinating. Temperature,
Absolutely.
It plays such a big role in how we enjoy wine, but also how we make wine. And it's the innovations in this area in the 20th century that really advanced winemaking technology to such a point that, we can enjoy a wide variety of like white wines that taste really fresh and energizing. And that wasn't typical in the past.
That is so true. Can I just go back 1 second?
Oh, please.
I would like to go because as you were talking about autolytic flavors, I just really wanted to stress how to tie in like all the interesting things you were talking about. Because when you were talking about earlier about like texture, that's actually autolytic flavors and compounds. And when you're talking about it, I want everyone to imagine when they think about, because autolytic flavors, it's just like, it sounds very chemistry. It is.
Yeah.
But what is that? It's actually the yeasts, these single cell organisms are breaking apart. They're breaking apart into actually little bits of like sugar and carbohydrates. 'Cause that's what they're built out of. And so they break apart, and that's actually what brings us those textures. So that's one of the main things is like, if I'm a winemaker, one of the things I want to do is I'm going to actually roll my barrels while they're aging so that all those yeast cells, all the autolytic pieces of yeast, those billions of pieces, rise up into the barrel, and actually they're actually introduced back into solution so they become part of the wine. Yeah, and that's where you're getting like so much. The yeast do so much for us, not just the booze, the fruit flavors, but also so much of the structure of wine is how yeast function. So I think it's awesome. It's the circle of life, whatever, kumbaya.
But something that it really needs to do its job is the right temperature.
Exactly. Thank you for bringing me right back to what's actually a really key point. And you're right about that. Temperature matters. The thing is, yeast have to be warm enough to actually do their job. If they're too cold, they can't process sugar. But they want to go hot. They really want to drive. They want to always pump it because they want to eat as much sugar as possible. You got to think of like that, they're just like, it's just like me with a candy bar, right?
They're teenage boys.
They are.
They want to go fast.
Oh,
they want to eat candy.
Yeah, it's just like imagine throwing like a 14-year-old boy into a candy shop and say, go. Right? And they're going to eat as much as possible all at once and then get really sick and then stop. And that's what you don't want. What you really want to train those 14-year-old boys to do, in this analogy, this is a creepy analogy for me to say, is actually keep them on task, right? So that you want them to eat the sugar but not ever stop. Keep on going for weeks on end. Not just like have a binge for a day, because they'll binge. And what would happen though if these yeast binge, and they actually would heat up so much that they would actually probably die off. So really what we need to do here is keeping those temperatures at that cool, long, slow. We get really complex flavors, really beautiful complex flavors. there's a lot of flavors you can get if the temperature rises up because there's sugar compounds. If they're not properly broken apart, you won't get these flavor compounds inside them. So they're called glycoside bonds, and they're sugars that in the center of them is a little flavor compound. So what you need is heat. So your yeast will be so enraptured, so rage filled, right, that they're going to go after these and just rip them apart. And so you need to go over 80 degrees usually to do that.
So when it's a low temperature fermentation, that's a slow fermentation.
Yes.
And then the temperature rises, that it becomes more active and
dynamic.
dynamic.
It speeds them up. They start doing some crazy stuff. Yep. It's kind of like, I guess like, throwing in some cocaine into that candy store, basically.
Got it.
They start going crazy. So temperature is controlling how the fermentation works.
And so I sort of had thought of it as you're dialing up flavors or dialing down. But as you're talking, I'm getting more of a vision of like a sea captain at the helm, kind of riding the waves of this really dynamic process.
Yeah.
And it's not so mechanical.
Yeah, that's a very intuitive way of talking about, because you're right. We're talking about hundreds of gallons inside these tanks. And fermentation isn't static. It's swirling around like an ocean. Mm-hmm. It's this fluid dynamic. It's moving around. It's actually moving around rather fast and moving in many different directions that you really can't foretell. Like you can't know what's going to happen at what point. It's this pure chaos of millions of different yeast eating and producing, and it's an ecosystem at this stage. It's self-contained. It's doing a lot of complex things. So trying to slow it down or speed it up, it is like navigating a massive ship. So you turn a little bit at a time, and you kind of have to know even before it gets too hot that you know it's going to get too hot. You might need to know like 3 or 4 hours ahead of time so you can slowly adjust your temperature, slowly adjust. And what a lot of new professional winemakers do, they overcalculate. They're trying to stop something from happening right away. It's getting too hot, so they throw the temperatures really far down, and then the whole fermentation just goes too cold and may even stop. You might even have a stuck fermentation. Yeah, you do have to be a captain, thinking long ahead about what's going to be needed to get to where you want to go.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's not like riding a bike or like a car where you can just turn. Nope.
So you're controlling the temperature.
Yeah.
You're also doing other processes to stress these guys out a little bit too, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Because the truth is, I must say that I do love fermentation. Like one of my, I would always say that if if I had a choice between hanging out with my fermenting wine or go to a dinner party, I'll always hang out with my wine.
Yeah, it sounds strange, but I've seen it. You develop a relationship.
Oh, yeah.
With the yeast colony and your wine. And you've also pointed out to me, and this has really driven it home, is when we're at the school and a student comes in to do a punch down or take a reading, you will sometimes comment to me like, oh, the yeast really like that person. And you can actually hear it. And like, it gets hot. There's movement.
Yes.
I have seen you at some dinner parties recently, and yes, I have no trouble imagining it. I'd much rather be with your yeast than some dinner guests. That's true. But it's because there is actually a relationship.
There is, and it's very funny. You can tell because you actually like temperatures go up. Like there's more activity with certain people. When I have a student like that, like, oh, they have the touch. No, it's something that you build. It's something you have. And there are people where fermentations just go really well. And I happen to be one of those people. Like fermentations always go well near me.
Yeah.
But, that is something, that is, whyever that is, I do not know. It's very possible it's because I've been around winemaking for my entire adult life. And so therefore my biodome is fully compatible with winemaking. I may be more wine than person at this stage. Like maybe the bugs driving my brain are actually, in fact, all a bunch of cerevisiae yeasts. Dictating everything I do.
You might be an alien from planet Cerevisiae. That might be where you come from.
I would love this. This would be absolutely fantastic. My dream. Oh, my dude. My people come take me home.
But tell me, you don't just babysit these guys. You stress them out a little bit. What do you do?
Let's give it. Yeah. So and here's the truth is that you also, like, being a good parent doesn't mean you're just like give them everything they want. No, you're actually curbing them. You are curbing temperature, like, because they desperately want to go hot. You force them to be cold, cooler, cooler, cooler. But you're also stressing them out in other ways, like sometimes just like not enough nutrients, withhold nutrients, not enough necessarily enough nitrogen. And what it does is it's forcing your yeast colonies to find other ways to break compounds down. And this really is helpful, like midway through fermentation. They're trying to process other compounds. And what you're going to end up having is more complex flavors, including some sulfur compounds. Now, stressing your fermentation is dangerous, but if you do it right, you're actually creating more complex flavors, more terroir, quote unquote, flavors that people would think is terroir, but it's just really winemaking technique about bringing like earthy or funkier notes into your wine, which layered below your deep dark fruit, which you got from a healthy fermentation. But it's problematic too, because if you go too far, you can get cabbage notes or rotten egg notes in your wines. And then you have done the unforgivable and you've destroyed your entire batch of wines.
So it's really this stressing process.
Yes.
That you see the results in fine wine. Like you're actually tasting that craftsmanship in a way.
Absolutely. Relationship with the yeast and fermentation is very, very fraught. Yes. Yeah, and like you're like, yeah, so like, yeah, do you want your 15, 14-year-old boys to like get everything? No, you want to stress them out a little bit. No, of course, you could be creating like, like a world's next senator or serial killer. Who knows,
Yeah.
Too much stress, is not great for kids or yeast, but just the right amount is perfect.
One of the things that winemakers fear the most, and I've never asked you this,
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Okay.
Are stuck fermentations? Have you experienced a stuck fermentation?
Yeah, unfortunately, this happens to everybody. We don't like to admit it. So what's a stuck fermentation, first of all? It's actually where your fermentation stops and it's not fully fermented yet. And the reason it's embarrassing is because you just did something stupid. Like, you actually basically, like, you think about that whole world within those tanks, right? It's a whole self-contained world. Something that you did or didn't do has made it actually fall, like basically die off. Like all the creatures have died. The world has stopped spinning, and that's your fault. All your people are dead. Everything's gone. So what you have to do is actually to restart it is that you can't use a similar yeast. You're going to have to actually start a whole new fermentation, oftentimes with something like mega purple, like some grape concentrates and water, and start a whole new fermentation with a yeast strain that will jumpstart the fermentation, start doing it again, but it won't be bringing good flavors. So the yeast that you had in there, which we're going to bring out beautiful, complex flavors, are all dead now. So now the only thing you can do is actually make a substandard wine from that. And everything that's happened because of that, it's been sitting, it's not fermenting, so you have volatile acid, maybe even some thiols, maybe some acid. Whatever you have to do now is all repair. And as a winemaker, if you're having to fix things, you're a failure. And you feel that deeply because your only job, like I love yeast. Every winemaker loves yeast. We love in wineries when everything's fermenting. It's just the best moment.
The best smell.
Everything about it is fantastic. Yeah. It's full of life. It's full of an unknown kind of life. It's very foreign to us, but also reacts to us. And we love everything about it. So if you fail, that's just very embarrassing. And it's because you did something really dumb or didn't do something. You can taste it. Like, you can taste the failure because it doesn't have any complexity. You could even probably taste whatever manipulations they were trying to do to hide it. I've had wines like that. You look at it like, who's the winemaker here? And I'm like, yeah, they've lost my respect. So, yeah, no, it's sad. It's a hard thing. It only happened to me once. And unfortunately, it wasn't too big of a batch. But yeah, it was very early on. And I tried to force it a little too much, actually. It was, at first it was a little too cold, and I tried to go too hot, and it peaked and died, and that was tough.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about wild yeast. So I know that you pull up a text sheet to see how a wine was made, and increasingly it'll list native yeast or ambient yeast as the type of yeast used. So I know that this is naturally occurring. This is on the grapes themselves, in the winery. So you're not using a cultured yeast.
Correct.
You're using what is just naturally occurring.
Usually in winemaking, when your grapes come in, you bring them in, whether you crush them or just whole berry right in. And, at the same time, you're adding a little bit of SO2, which is naturally occurring in wine anyways, but it's going to kill all that bacteria. All of those yeast are native. And then so you can add your own. And then why we do that is because we have books. We have isolated thousands of different wine yeasts from around the world, and they each have their own specific use cases. Like if I'm making Cabernet and Napa, I'm going to use, there's like 3 different yeasts I like to use. If I'm making Grenache, there's another yeast I like to use. If I'm making a Red Zin, there's like 5 I love. The wine's too high alcohol, or if the fruit is a little weird, I have other ones I'll use. But if you're not doing that, and you're allowing to all these, like basically allow terroir come in, and all these, most of these, they're going to be non-sac yeast, and there'll be some sac yeast in there as well.
Okay.
Now, that's coming off the fruit, but you also have yeast in the winery itself. So one of the things that happens is you have entire colonies of yeast developing over the years that wineries been using not native yeast, but actually standard yeasts.
Okay.
So you end up having your own yeast colonies that derive from these other yeasts. And so these now are your quote unquote native yeasts in your winery itself. So you'll have some coming in on the fruit, and then you'll have some from the winery itself. And these are both going to have play in your wine. So that mix of non-Saccharomyces yeast and Saccharomyces yeast, you want me to tell you how that works? Because it's very confusing. And this is where that whole things that contribute and some things that are evil that kind of come in and play here. So your cerevisiae yeast, let's just call them your wine yeasts, they're pretty standoffish in the beginning. If you're not creating a batch ahead of time and then dumping in like a large volume of your selected yeast in, if wild yeast are in there, those cerevisiae yeast, those wine yeast, they're just going to take a back seat for a while. They're not going to be really active. The yeast that are active in the beginning are all these wild non-sac yeasts, and they start eating the sugars like crazy. And they're interesting because they're going to bring out way different flavors than Saccharomyces yeast. You just don't know what they are. Some of them are going to really bring in like that, oh, hey, it's a secondhand sock day, or it just might be pineapple or synthetic banana flavors, whatever it may be. They're going to bring in a lot of chaos agents right there, up until about 5% alcohol. Now, as it hits up 5% alcohol, they start dying out because they don't thrive in alcohol solutions. So once they're there, they start dying out. And this is where the Saccharomyces yeast, which has been hanging out, gaining larger and larger populations, and they're now going to start taking control. And because they're resilient up to around 15-16% alcohol, and also they start pumping out themselves sulfur compounds, which will kill off all the other yeast. So they gain massive domination. They become truly like the last existing colony of yeast within that wine, and they'll take it all the way to the end.
So if you have a natural wine and it's 13.5% alcohol, and it tells you on the text sheet made with native yeast or wild yeast or ambient yeast, to get to that alcohol percentage, though, there had to be some sac yeast in there.
Exactly. There's some Saccharomyces yeast. It has to be. And then the Saccharomyces yeast that's wild, some of them are coming from the winery itself because they've been making wine and there's billions of yeast cells just thriving. And then probably some Saccharomyces yeast that were on the grapes themselves. A lot of wineries now will actually isolate a specific wild yeast that is very beneficial in their own winery, and they'll send that to a lab. And that lab will actually grow that specific yeast to a population that you can now add back. So you can say it's a wild yeast because technically it is. And so, that's possible. Now, there's something else we do. So what if you want all the benefits of a wild fermentation, but you don't want any of the risks? They now grow and produce very specific non-sac yeast that you can actually add to your wines. I actually do this, especially with my young winemaker students. I'll add non-sac yeast that has actually been grown and isolated. And what it does is it helps your fermentation in the beginning. Especially if you're not going to crush your grapes right away, you add that, it'll start the fermentation process up to around 5% and prevent any volatile acids or any weird fermentations to happen. So natural winemaking has progressed to such a point that you can be a natural winemaker and not be a natural winemaker at the exact same time.
That's fascinating. Now, I know you have a story about using wild yeast.
Oh, God. Okay. One of the reasons why I am not a wild yeast fan is because of this one trial I did a long time ago. This was decades and decades ago, but what I did was a trial, and winemakers do trials all the time. Whenever you want to do one small change, you do a trial. And we do them in carboys. And carboys, like, picture a milk jug, 30 gallons or 50 gallons. So massive glass with a small opening at the top. Now, these are perfect for doing trials because you can see what's happening. So what I did was I had my harvest guys say, hey, pull me some grapes off one of our lesser blocks that we don't really need. And I'm going to do 100 pounds on just native ferments. And I crushed them, put them in, and just did a trial. And for this one specifically, I did it off skins. I just want a simple little fermentation. Now, as it's going through, it's going fine. And then I start noticing, like, day 4, day 5, as the wine, it actually spins around like normal, but then it starts slowing down. Is the fermentation slowing down? No. I kind of shook it. And as it moved, it's like gelatinous. And now, mind you, I was not trying too hard to make a clean wine. I think there was some dirt that was on the grapes because they weren't really trying hard to, like, get perfect grapes. And it was so nasty. We couldn't get it out because it was so thick. I just walloped it, cracked it so I could drain it out. And it was just disgusting. I mean, it smelled so nasty. But yeah, that can happen.
I do want to talk about, since we're on the topic of yeast, this is quite rare.
Oh, Brett. Yeah.
Brett. Good old Brett. So I often describe this to my students as a horse blanket smell.
Yep.
If you've had sour beer, you're familiar with it. Other common notes, leather, mushrooms, cloves, smoke, Band-Aid, barnyard. There are some wines that have a Brettanomyces character.
They do. Now they're getting fewer and fewer.
Sure.
Because, and let me stress this is not typical.
Okay.
And Brettanomyces in very few wineries and very few areas play with it because it's dangerous. This bacteria, and just before we start, some brewers actually love using Brettanomyces. They have those Brett flavors. But you can never make beers like that in a winery. And in fact, when I was in California, I was told I could never go to Russian River Brewery because the chance of actually bringing in this Brettanomyces back to the winery was so great they could bring on your shoes or that. So you stay far, far, far away from it. It's this dangerous because it gets everywhere. And once you have an infection, you can never get rid of it. It doesn't matter how clean you are. The most famous version of this is a really, really important winery historically in Napa, Buehler Vineyards, BV. One of their original wineries actually got infected with Brettanomyces so badly that they had to basically burn it down and rebuild because there was just no other way of getting rid of it. That's how serious it is. There are wine regions that actually do traditionally play with it. For instance, some winemakers in the Rhode Valley, specifically in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and a little bit in the Northern Rhone as well. Well, and those are very distinctive. Too much of it will end up smelling like you say horse blanket, I say a porta potty on fire.
Okay. Evocative.
It's really that. But also like in natural wines, a lot of natural wines, whether they intend to or not, you can get some Brettanomyces notes. But honestly, when that happens, that's usually not intentional. That's still dirty winemaking or not sterile enough winemaking. Very few really want too much of that. But yeah, it's really impressive when somebody uses it properly, though.
Properly means it adds complexity, some depth, some little more character.
Yeah. That little bit of stress, that little bit of complexity, that little bit of danger, is actually really delightful as a layer. But if it's too much, like the tall, dark, dangerous stranger versus a serial killer, a little bit of it actually adds a little bit of mystery to the wine.
Okay. Great, Keith.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think we're ready for a little lightning round. I love when we do these.
All right.
I'm going to throw out at you a style of wine.
Okay.
And I'd love it if you could read to me or like divine the yeast character.
Oh, okay, great. So yeah, I know you love this because you get to actually pepper me with questions, and I get to look like an idiot in front of our, millions of viewers.
Hardly. All right, let's do this.
All right.
Let's get started. One of my very favorite wines.
Yeah.
Muscadet.
Yes, easy one. Lees aging. The lees, as they autolyze, they break apart, giving it this nutty, a little bit creamier note to a wine that otherwise would be incredibly astringent and tart.
Fascinating. I could have answered that one, but you did it much better.
Oh,
now
you.
This is for you. Okay. Oregon Pinot Noir.
Native ferment Oregon Pinot Noirs. You oftentimes will get, if they're native yeast, tend to bring a wild strawberry, not a fresh strawberry, but a wild strawberry note, as well as sometimes bringing a little bit of wet earth into the mix.
Really?
Yes. Yep.
I did not know that. What about Rioja?
Oh, Rioja. All right. Here's where we get a little bit of the Brett, actually, sometimes when they're really old, the old style, and specifically if they're using like old American oak barrels, they're porous and not properly cleaned. Old style, absolutely amazing. Leather, and sometimes even like a Slim Jim, like dried meat note to it. And that's also, so those are the sometimes Brettanomyces, but also they can pull that off even without Brett.
Okay, finally, let's wrap up with Chablis.
French white Burgundy that's bright, fresh, and clean and clear. They get those really incredibly clear, beautiful, austere notes by using standard industry yeasts.
Really?
Definitely not native yeast on Chablis.
Keith, I have learned so much.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, that's my pleasure. It's always fantastic. I'm glad we get to talk about yeast. It's a geeky subject, but I think people are walking away with some really good information. And I love talking about this. But anyways, so I do have an ask, though, for everybody. Now that I'm finished talking about yeast for 40 minutes, my recommendation is if you find things like this fascinating, you should take classes, specifically with the National Wine School, whether it's online through their awesome online program, but also through National Wine School's offerings at universities and at the finest wine schools in America.
And I have an ask as well. You mentioned earlier Mega Purple.
Yes.
If folks are curious about what that is exactly, go ahead and listen to our episode. WTF is in my wine.
Yeah,
We
that's
cover
right.
that. And there's also some great stuff in the back catalog, wine myths, rules you can break, etc. And if you happen to be in the Philadelphia area, please come by the Wine School of Philadelphia and catch a class with either one of us. We're both entertaining. Keith swears a lot more in person.
If you want a lot of F-bombs dropped into a wine class to make certain people laugh and other people really uncomfortable, you'll probably really enjoy it. I love teaching wine.
We love having students come and give us feedback. If you enjoyed this, please rate, review, and subscribe. You can leave a comment for us in the notes. Otherwise, we will talk to you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.